This is Trader's Workshop with Adam H. Grimes. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Trader's Workshop. I'm your host, Adam Grimes, and this episode is titled, What I Got Right. So together with the last episode, What I Got Wrong, these two episodes are me kind of looking back over the last 5 to 7 years of my work, and that's a couple books, that's a bunch of blogs, that's daily market commentary in several different formats, that's working with many traders, and really thinking about focusing on how my thinking has changed. And I think if you listen to the last episode, you'll see these things are not black and white. It's not as simple. I'm not going to tell you today a bunch of things that I was just right about, and great, we can all move on. That's not so helpful, right? But rather it's thinking around corners. And you saw that in the things that I was wrong about. I don't think I was completely wrong, but it's just realizing maybe a shift in emphasis, a shift in perspective, a shift maybe in meaning with some of these things. And the list that I have for you today of things that I got right, also the same thing. There is a hint of a little edge of wrongness in some of these things too. So what is this list? Well, I'll jump into the list in detail, but just kind of big overview. The first thing I got right is really the importance of critical thinking. Second thing is my continued hatred, if you like that word, for magic numbers and mystical mumbo jumbo in trading. And I'm going to tell you, make some confessions today about my history with that. Third is the value of simplicity. And the last is the importance of people, the importance of connections with people. And, I also tell you that I'm doing these episodes, I'm doing this podcast, and it's kind of an overarching theme of my work that this is as much for me as it is for you. I've been supremely honored, and I don't even know the words. Frankly, I struggle to find the words to really express my emotions over the past few years. Past maybe 10 years, so many people come to me and say, your work has helped me, whether it's helped somebody turn a corner that's been struggling for years. I've heard from lots of people who left the trading floor, tried to transition to the screen, did a lot of different things that didn't work, tried a lot of things. And for many people, my work has been kind of the last piece that's helped them turn that corner. For other beginning traders, sometimes I get kind of strange but really profound compliments like, I worked through your stuff and then I went and tried a bunch of other things and came back to your stuff, and I realized what I had there valuable. And even several people have told me that my work showed them they didn't want to trade. And that's valuable too. Whether it's you outsource your trading, you become an investor, or you just realize this really isn't something that you want to do. I've been very, very touched that my work has helped so many people. But I'll tell you the truth, it's also helped me by making a commitment to. It's the same thing with teaching. When you teach somebody to do something and you teach somebody to do the right thing and you criticize somebody for doing the wrong thing, it's much harder to go do something stupid yourself. Showing somebody how to do it right really reinforces the correct behavior. And this is kind of the same thing. This is a very public way for me to share a lot of ideas, for me to continue to commit within myself to becoming better, and so the things that I'm sharing with you today are things that I am going to try to do more of and dig into deeper and just generally improve along these lines over the next few years. So with that long rambling introduction, and by now I ramble, let's jump in to the importance of critical thinking. So one of the things, particularly over the past year, I've been hanging out in a lot of trading groups, sometimes as a fly on the wall, sometimes as an active participant. And this has been from the beginning of my trading in the mid-90s. I really saw when all of the bulletin boards took off and all of the discussion groups and mailing lists. And I wasn't there in the very, very beginning, but I think I was there when it really started to get momentum through the build up to the dot-com crash. And then, of course, the internet and internet trading groups in various capacities have come and gone. And I think Facebook seems to be a real focus now. And I see some common threads that over the years, you really see struggling traders. You see beginning traders. You see traders with frankly no clue. And I don't say that in an insulting way because as I told you in the previous episode, I started as a trader with absolutely no shred of a clue. But what really disturbs me is seeing people who don't have a commitment to learning how to think. And that is so incredibly critical. For instance, we'll talk about magic numbers in a moment. I just had a discussion with a guy who very sincerely said, if someone somewhere is using something, then it must work. Maybe variables change. Maybe it can't quite work for you. And that's a common thing that's thrown out with methodologies that don't have an edge. You just have to figure out how to make it work, and it's your responsibility. If you can't make it work, it's your problem. He really believed that. And I was completely unable to shape his thinking to think about what is the standard of proof. And it's not easy, right? It's not an easy question. It's not an easy question in science. It's something that the field of psychology and psychiatry, the fields of psychology and psychiatry are struggling with research methodology. It's not at all clear when we say proof works, what does that mean? But it is at least clear to me that showing me multiple examples of something on a chart is not a standard of proof. What we have to do is prove that over a large sample, there's a statistical edge to something. And we can have lots of healthy debate about how we should conduct those tests, what those tests mean, what can go wrong with those tests, what might be misleading, what we might be missing. Many things we can discuss, but you can't just show me a pattern on a chart and say, hey, look, it works. Somebody did that with trend following today. The question was posed, is trend following dead? And my answer was, I don't think it's dead, but I don't think it's a particularly viable methodology for the individual trader. And let's look at trend following returns from the past 10 years they've cratered. And we should at least have concerns about this. And a guy posted a chart of a market trending and, kind of snarkily, I think, maybe it was my interpretation, but he said, look, it does work. You just show me a chart. It's not a standard of proof. So this is why, and I'm struggling to figure out how to help people with this. My work has focused very heavily on randomness and understanding randomness, which is not an easy thing to understand. And I'm not a trained mathematician. I think I probably know more math than the average person on the street, but for somebody with an actual math education, my degree of knowledge and skill is probably kind of sad and laughable. But in trying to understand randomness, we begin to gain a respect for all of the things that could happen in the market and critically for what could be wrong with our perception. And I've talked about that a little bit. That's kind of a recurring theme, that we can't trust our own sense of what is meaningful, what is significant, what is real, because we aren't really good at processing patterns. Actually, that's not true. We are so good at processing patterns that we'll create them when they don't exist, and we'll assign meaning when none exist. So this is what I mean, and this is going to be something that I'm going to continue to challenge you with, and I'm going to continue to challenge myself to find ways to communicate this better, because honestly, I've just rambled for 4 or 5 minutes. Some of you intuitively understand what I'm talking about. Some of you are very familiar, but some of you aren't, and I don't think I've done a very good job communicating this difficult topic. And this is these are dots I plan to connect in the future. So number 2, magic numbers. Okay, you all know there are all of these different kinds of magic numbers. Fibonacci is kind of the most common, but there are all of these Gann ratios. There are all of these things associated with different angles in Elliott wave and Gann. There are things like Murphy math, Camarilla. Is that right? I think that's the word, levels. And there are even the old floor trader pivots, and there are all kinds of variations of these things. And there are now, as we look into things with a little bit more computing power, people are pulling out different levels with looking at action and derivatives and volume in different levels. And some of these probably have some quantitative significance. If you're looking at things that are happening in the order book, okay, but I continue to be so extremely suspicious of particularly Fibonacci. It's an easy target. And I guess, my work on this has, I believe, vindicated my stance. And I would throw out a few things as evidence. First of all, it's impossible to disprove. Let's put that up front. If you come to me and you say, I think these ratios, and we all know what the ratios are, the Fibonacci ratios, are significant in financial markets, if that's what we're trying to prove, well, it's impossible to disprove that. But what I can do is show you hundreds, thousands of tests, different ways to test these structures where we don't see significance. You might also say, and I think we could potentially have a discussion about ratios, and I'll tell you why. I think one place we cannot have a discussion is if you think the actual numbers in the Fibonacci sequence are significant as inputs for indicators. That is a degree of mathematical and numerical illiteracy that I have trouble being kind with. Just to be perfectly honest, when somebody says, oh, I use 13 because it's a Fibonacci number, and a lot of times they'll throw out numbers that aren't actually, quote, Fibonacci numbers. They don't understand how the sequence is really generated, that it can be generated from any, if we're looking at really the ratios with the process, you can start with any seed numbers, end up with a Fibonacci sequence. It's fairly easy to test, I guess. You could test the Fibonacci moving averages versus the non and find significance. But the very interesting thing is I continue to put this challenge out there. People who believe in these numbers, help me believe, basically, and help me believe with some actual quantitative statistical test. Instead, what you get are people will show you charts where it's worked. People will show you examples of where it's worked. People will say things, which again, as I said in the previous episode, I don't know that this is wrong. People will say, well, they don't work by themselves. You have to look at them in combination. But then I would say, well, still, shouldn't we be able, if these things are so important, shouldn't we be able to structure some kind of test? And to go back to my first point with critical thinking, that's one of the ideas that has guided my understanding of market data and market analysis. I don't think it's possible that you could have something that is both really profoundly, fundamentally significant to market movement and is also invisible in the data, right? If it's important, we should see it. And if it's really hidden, then maybe it's not as important as we thought. You also get a lot of really vague arguments, like people will throw smug things back at you, like, and this has happened to me. Oh, it's math. You can't argue with math. Well, anybody who says that doesn't know much about math, right? First of all, on a basic level, if you would just consider that you can't argue with math ends a discussion, I would venture to guess you don't know a lot about math. And second of all, what we're really talking about is not math. I'm not debating that if you multiply this number by this number, you get this number, and then we can draw that line on the chart. Okay, we can't debate that, I guess. It's arithmetic. But what we really need to have a discussion with is should you do that? And if you do that, what does it mean? And if you do that and you create the level, statistically speaking, what happens around the level? And don't just show me charts where you've gone back and found examples of where it's worked, because it has to be conducted at the very least in a walk forward testing methodology, right? Ideally, I would think we should be able to conduct some kind of algorithmic statistical test. That's probably not quite the right word, but I think we should be able to pull it out of the data in some way. But at the very least, you throwing out pithy sayings and showing me charts, it's not any kind of proof. So, and I guess the other reason that I'm so suspicious of these numbers is I don't need them. I'm on very public record with market calls every single day for a decade. And no, I have not been always right. I would never tell you that. Anybody tells you that's full of crap. I've been wrong a lot, but I have been right on big picture market direction. I've been right at turns with a pretty consistent degree of consistency. And my trading has done very well without using these numbers. So I would kind of throw that out, throw that out is one potential thing, at least in my thinking, that I discovered when I eliminated these elements, that my trading became more consistent. And here's another personal note. Here's something that I first dropped this in an interview I gave a couple weeks ago, and I don't think the interview is published yet, so I think I'll get to press first. Sorry to the interviewer. But I actually, I think a lot of people like to say you aren't looking at these numbers right. And my undergraduate degree, many of you know my formal training was in music. I also did a degree in comparative religion. And a focus of that and a particular interest and passion of mine was what we call the Western mystical tradition, which is all of these medieval texts on what we would essentially call magic today. I read Henry Cornelius Agrippa, which some of you may know, most of you probably don't. A lot of the alchemical text, alchemy, of course, was part of it. And this was a body of thought that I think in many ways was kind of this amalgam of religion, superstition, and early scientific thought. It was people trying to understand how the world worked, with, I suppose, some received, some good, some bad wisdom from antiquity. The point of all this is that when I started trading, I was very attracted to these methodologies involving secret, mystical numbers, hidden codes. I've done a lot of the work. People talk about Gann finding codes in the Bible. Not everybody's aware of that. And I've done some of that work with the source material. I've actually done quite a bit of that work. So I believe that I came to these ratios as more of a true believer than most people could have been. I believe that they were a fundamental element of the universe. And I also came with a good deal more knowledge, frankly, than most people have. I had knowledge from the original source materials. And then my experience with these, as I used them through, remember, I was a very active trader. So we're talking hundreds of trades, even sometimes in the course of a month, and certainly thousands, eventually tens of thousands of trades, and careful analysis of those results, really seeing objectively, this works, this doesn't work. And then as I learned to actually do some data analysis, and these are quite difficult to structure tests. It's not something you can construct a black and white test of. I became a non-believer, if you will. And I'm using religious terminology because, frankly, the fervor surrounding these magical numbers is almost religious. People simply believe, and you cannot really contradict that belief. But there's a little bit more of my personal journey, which I don't think I've ever shared anywhere. I shared the quantitative side. I shared the, seeing it kind of not really work in my trading like we thought it would, and then doing analysis, and then eventually doing statistical analysis. But I never shared the rest of that. And I think that's actually kind of some important context. So I think that's enough of a ramble on that. And that brings us to the value of simplicity, which ties into the other thing, right? One thing that I have been amazed at over the years is the power of simple trading models. Now, it has to be right. This is, let's say that you have a very complex trading system with a bunch of different indicators, a bunch of different things you're doing, a bunch of different steps in your decision tree. I think you could probably have a lot of dead weight in there and maybe be more okay than if you have a very simple model and you have the wrong inputs. In that case, you're probably going to lose. You're going to lose faster. You're going to lose more consistently, probably, because there are less moving parts, degrees of freedom, less randomness in your inputs. And that's actually a good thing. You want to lose efficiently if you're not doing the right thing, so you can correct your course and figure it out. But both with the trading systems and also with fundamental modeling. My history on this was I began as a technical trader, and then I learned a little bit about fundamentals, and then I learned a lot about fundamentals, and I came from an agricultural community, so I kind of thought I understood, we could probably figure out, how much corn are people putting in the ground, what kind of yield, what's the weather like, how's it being used, and we could probably come to some kind of fundamental modeling. So my first fundamental modeling was really with agricultural commodities. And I realized very quickly the fly in that ointment, if you will, is that there was no way I would ever know as much as the farmers. It wasn't quite clear to me as it is today. Now I know the commodity markets you're actually trading against insiders all the time. That's why the markets exist. It's the whole reason that we have commodity markets. So you're always going up against somebody who knows a lot more and frankly knows a lot more about what to do with what they know than you do. I don't think you can compete on that level. At least I couldn't. So I left fundamental modeling and really dove headfirst back into technicals and had good solid success with technicals. And then when I did my MBA, I did a lot of econometrics. I did a lot of modeling and saw a lot of the really sophisticated techniques that people were using. And when I left school, I probably had an undue fascination with that. People building multi-factor models, multivariate regressions, all kinds of different ways to fit good models to data. Just go ahead and say that, and to make models that look very good in the past. And it took a long time of me using these models and creating models. And by the way, creating some extremely powerful fundamental forecasting models that just have one or two inputs. Now, of course, you got to do the right thing with those inputs. You got to know when you look at trend, you got to know how to measure that trend. You absolutely have to better have the right inputs, right? But you would be absolutely shocked how powerful simple models can be. The industry works against this, right? Because everybody wants you to believe everything is so complicated, you could not possibly figure it out. Don't bother. And by the way, the artificial intelligence is going to figure it out. You can't compete with that, so don't even try. But what no one will tell you is that a few simple models with a few simple inputs can give you a tremendous edge. And you don't need the complexity of magic numbers and garbage like that, but you do need to be able to think critically. Haha, look how this ties together. It's nice, isn't it? You do need to be able to think critically and to be able to evaluate whether what you're doing has an edge or does not have an edge. Number 4, the significance of connection. Maybe this is just a little bit of me getting older, but I really do think what motivates me as much as anything else is you, the listeners, the readers, the viewers, and thinking about how dark, how lonely so much of this trading journey was for me. The times that I really didn't think I could do it. And as I've said in multiple interviews, the kind of irony of that is that a lot of times those points where I thought I was going to fail came after periods of significant success. So just realizing and we'll talk a lot more about all of this, but just realizing the emotional roller coaster and knowing that my work has been able to give people support through that, and also has been able to give people both intellectual guidance and emotional support through some of the dark times. I mean, many of you have sent me emails, and so you know, and then some of you don't, but I get some very nice emails, and I do think that I certainly have discovered over the past few years, as I focused more. It's a little bit of a difficult thing, right? Because you don't necessarily want to write to an audience. Well, let me say this again. What you don't want to do is go out and say to people, hey, what do you want to hear? I did this with this podcast a little bit. I got some great ideas, but in general, people don't really know what they need, and what people want is many times not what they need. So I've kind of had to walk a line between fulfilling a little bit of entertainment, but also really thinking about how to connect with you while I remain true to the integrity of my message and to sharing with you what I think is going to help you along this journey. As I've done that, wow, it's been such a powerful synergy, and a lot of lights have turned on for me, both in terms of how to teach, how to structure this information, but also how to build my life and how to build my business. And, so for all of you who've been on the receiving end of that, just know it's not a receiving end, it's a circle. And that circle of communication has been just incredibly powerful. So I think that's actually a good place to wrap up. I'm very much looking forward to next episodes of the podcast. I expect here at the beginning to be dropping on average, maybe 2 a week here for a while, and then we'll move into a 1-week publication schedule. Also, I really would love for you to check out my work. I said I'm not going to take sponsors for these podcasts. I will drop some sort of advertisements for things that I'm doing, but for now, I'd really like you, wherever you found this, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review. If you're so inspired, a 5-star review would be great, obviously. iTunes is also a very big thing for a new podcast, so please go subscribe, 5 stars, review, if you would please, on iTunes. Tell your friends, tell everybody on all the trading communities, whatever you can do to help me get the word out. That'll make me produce more content. And also check out my blog, adamhgrimes.com, and a good hub where you can see I'll share everything I'm doing is Twitter at AdamHGrimes. You should already be following me on Twitter at AdamHGrimes. And if there is some strange reason you're not, maybe go do that. Okay, we will wrap up here. I will see you back very soon for the next episode. Thank you very much.